Right, it's now time for our closing plenary themed on AI and youth for development. Quite an apt segue there, with the amazing Mick Sheldrick, co-founder of Global Citizen. I'm going to re-invite the wonderful Marcia to hand over the reins to you and craft this wonderful closing session.
Wonderful. Thank you. I was just saying that what a great segue from the previous panel. Thank you, Alice and Nancy and Karen. And I love that idea that we should be looking at what 11-year-olds think about AI and how they can use it. I've got a 10 and 12-year-old, so I'm going to have that conversation later today. But it gives me really great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, the very impressive Michael Sheldrick. He's a policy entrepreneur and a driving force behind the efforts of Global Citizen to end extreme poverty. He is Chief Policy, Impact, and Government Affairs Officer for Global Citizen, where he leads the organization's campaigns to mobilize support from governments, business, and foundations. He is the author of the Amazon best-selling book, From Ideas to Impact, a playbook for influencing and implementing change in a divided world, which just came out in April of this year. And his career spans the world of pop and policy. He's worked with an incredible roster of international artists that ranges from Beyonce, Coldplay, Lady Gaga, and he has worked with prominent political leaders as well, like Brazil's President Lula da Silva, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And of course, I have the pleasure of serving with him on the board of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, which is the engagement platform for the 8th UN Secretary General, who we heard at the beginning of our day. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the virtual floor to you, Mick, and then listen in carefully so that we can have a few questions following your remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Marcia. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm going to show a presentation as well. Thank you. Look, first of all, I would say I'm really thrilled to be with you today because we've just announced the Global Citizen lineup. For those coming to New York for the UN General Assembly, it's going to be on September 28th. And you can head to globalcitizen.org or check out any of the handles for who's performing this year. But really what I want to talk about today, and I want to share some insights from my new book, From Ideas to Impact, which outlines 8 steps to shape policy, and in particular, how we can ensure that the age of AI can be the age to advance the SDGs. And, you know, I think you've probably heard throughout the course of today, the myriad of opportunities where artificial intelligence can fast track the SDGs. You know, I was listening to an interview one of my friends did with the UN Special Envoy for Technology last night, and he said there are challenges and opportunities without passports. AI is one of them, no matter where you are. And I think we know that as of last year, the halfway mark, the Sustainable Development Goals was 15% complete. And so the question is how do you exponentially accelerate progress in the remaining 7 years or so? And this is where AI can be a huge force for good. You know, there's myriad of statistics around the world, you know, looking at reports from Boston Consulting Group and others that will tell you about, through new efficiencies, through data collection, how AI has the capacity to reduce global greenhouse emissions by 5 to 10%, which is equivalent to the emissions of the entire European Union. And philanthropy is stepping in. I'm sharing here for those who might be inclined to apply. There's currently an opportunity, I believe, through the end of July to participate in this challenge grant from the Bezos Earth Fund with $100 million on the table for those concepts that can leverage artificial intelligence to really protect biodiversity, protect nature, and address the challenges of illegal deforestation. And of course, there's myriad of opportunities, has been mentioned, in health, in education, in other ways as well, where this can be a force for good. This morning I was on a call with a foundation in Northern Europe, and they were talking about how artificial intelligence can be used to actually prevent sexual abuse of minors and children. And they spoke at length about how, traditionally a lot of their work has had to be on raising awareness, leveraging social media. Now through AI, they can actually try and reach potential perpetrators before a crime has been committed and try and intervene before and stop this from happening. And they were talking me through, the ways they're using artificial intelligence to do that. So there's clearly a lot of innovation, but of course, there's also concern, like with any technology, and I say this, there's the techno optimists out there, and you see this, by the way, not with just artificial intelligence. You see it with climate tech. You see it with all these new technologies. People say, look, if you put technology out there, this alone will provide the solution. And of course, we know that's not true. We know that technology without good policy can exacerbate inequities. It can create new inequities as well. We saw this, for instance, during the pandemic when vaccines were created, leveraging research and development in a breakneck speed, but we saw how they were very quickly hoarded and bought up by those countries that could afford to buy them, and how there was an inequity in the rollout, which wasn't really equitable at all. And it's estimated that, millions more lives could have been saved had it not been for the inequitable rollout of the vaccine. And of course, you don't need me to tell you, the International Monetary Fund was talking about, the impact on the future of work, the impact on productivity, the impact on how this might impact certain countries more than others. One thing I always talk about, for all the talk around social media, artificial intelligence, is the fact that in parts of Africa, for instance, across the entire continent, 600 million people don't have access to reliable electricity. 1 in 3 people don't have access to the internet worldwide, right? And this is before you also think about the impact on the environment. The other week, a colleague of ours pointed out to me that the infrastructure currently used to store data and cloud, and obviously AI is just one part of that cloud storage, that alone produces more emissions than the entire aviation sector a year, right? And aviation, to put it in perspective, contributes 3.5% to our global emissions. So this is becoming a big part of our global footprint. Another example, apparently the daily use now of ChatGPT around the world produces the energy equivalent to that produced by 17,000 US households. So this is not just exacerbating potentially inequities between human beings, but indeed also the negative impact on our planet. So the question is we know policy can bring forward and make sure that AI isn't just utilized in an ethical way, but also that it really has a beneficial and positive impact for humanity. We know that AI policy for good is essential if we really want to leverage the best, mitigate the worst. And so some examples of policies out there. Well, the first one is, of course, public investment, right? How do we actually address issues like energy poverty? And the good news is, good ideas can come from anywhere, and there's many solutions out there already. The World Bank's International Development Association, IDA, which is really the most effective poverty busting fund there is in the world, they've just launched an appeal for the world's wealthiest governments to increase how much they support IDA by about 25%. So this would be around $120 billion. And that sounds like a lot of money, but when you put it in perspective, it's a fraction of what these governments spend. I think the US defense budget now is up to $800 billion a year. So 120 billion collectively, what they would be able to do with that money is provide 250 million people across Africa with electricity by 2030. So actually connecting people to electricity so that they can actually utilize the benefits. And so this is one thing where we can all get behind. Global Citizen and other campaigns are mobilizing people to use their voice, saying, well, let's invest publicly. But we also know there's many other policies out there to mitigate the bad. And this is really where you all come in. I talk about this concept of the policy entrepreneur, and it's really a recognition that government alone cannot solve this. The private sector alone cannot solve this. You need leadership across nonprofits. You need leadership in philanthropy, and you need everyone coming together to galvanize, using our advocacy to set the right voice. And so this is really where, in writing my book, I distilled 8 principles of how you go about really setting the agenda and how anyone can do this, whether you're a cultural icon like Taylor Swift, a business leader, or an everyday citizen, leveraging unconventional means to break through and bring policy. And just to give you one example of a policy entrepreneur in this space who is catalyzing AI for good. A few weeks ago, I was in Barbados and I met a young woman. She's studying at law school, and she pointed out she heads up a foundation called the Erling Bradshaw Foundation. And she pointed out to me that whenever technology and there's no guardrails in place, obviously we know they exacerbate divisions, particularly between marginalized groups. And of course, women and girls often fall into that. And she was talking about the fact that in schools across the world right now, bullying, public shaming, all of these negative vices really of society is being exacerbated because of the rise of AI-generated content, in particularly, revenge pornography, images that look real, you can't distinguish from, real life content, and this is being filtered, it's ended up in people's phones, it's being spread like wildfire. And so she's looking forward, as part of her foundation, several policies. One is actually educating policymakers about this and making sure that in parliaments at the UN, they actually pass bans to ban the use of AI-generated content for negative behaviors like revenge pornography. And the Australian government, I think just over the past week, actually just instituted a similar ban. But the other thing she pointed out to me is across the entire Caribbean, you've got law schools, you've got lawyers being trained where there's no awareness around technology, and these discussions are not taking place. And so if future lawmakers, policymakers, lawyers, and judiciary members are not preparing here, how are they expected to regulate? How are they expected to keep up with change? And this is where she's campaigning to make sure that education institutions are also equipping the lawyers of tomorrow with the skills to actually be able to put in effective laws, put in effective regulations. But we know that, and I mean incredible advocates around the world, university students. I've been on this book tour, people really stepping up to this space with phenomenal amount of ideas and intellect, and really, it's inspiring. But we know that they can't do this by themselves. Yes, good ideas come from anywhere, but the question is how we implement them. And this is where I think philanthropy has a role to play. Philanthropists and foundations, if you're sat there and you're wondering, how can I support the equitable rollout of AI infrastructure? How can I ensure that AI is used to actually close the gap on poverty, to actually address climate change? I believe that philanthropy has a huge catalytic role to play by actually investing in the nonprofits, investing in the policy entrepreneurs, investing in those who are actually saying, I know how to, with the right resources and recognition, I'm already working tirelessly hard, but I can bring about that systemic change to make sure those advocates can compete on an equal level playing field with well-resourced professional lobbyists for the scarce attention of policymakers. And, I think, often, I use the analogy that, 50, 60 years ago, prior to the green agricultural revolution of the 20th century, you had these great foundations like the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation, and they invested in early research looking at actually how modified crops, right, and crop diversity could be used to actually increase agricultural productivity. But what they recognize, these foundations, if we just invest in the science, if we just invest in creating more ideas, and we don't invest in people to advocate, to amplify, and actually put these research recommendations in front of policymakers, then it doesn't really matter. It's all academic. But because they did that, because they funded that, these efforts were basically credited with helping to save 1 billion lives from starvation. And I think today's philanthropic endeavors have the potential to follow a similar trajectory, driving meaningful, impactful changes if we actually invest in the policy entrepreneurship to ensure AI can be for good. And here, I want to end on an optimistic note before we go to the discussion, because, around the world, we hear that we are in an age of despair, right? You don't need me to tell you this. You probably hear it from your friends and family. I know in a recent conversation, I gave a book talk at Columbia University, literally when there were protests on campus and there were counter protests. It was a real, dark time. And I remember one student at the university asking me this profound question. She said, how can we use this critical and perhaps historic moment to create lasting institutional solutions? And she's not alone in wrestling with how to create meaningful change in a world rife with divisions. And if you look at these statistics from Glocalities, which I'm showing here, every age group below the age of 55 is going towards, increasing levels of despair. And in particular, young men in particular, aged between 18 to 32, this pushes, as it's seen here, towards, isolationism, authoritarianism in how they lead their lives. And, it's my belief, when the data plays this out, that when people lack agency, they become susceptible to distractions that offer, temporary, dopamine boosts that give you the illusion or the impression of creating change, like police and others' social media posts, but without actually impacting very few lives. And what we're seeing in elections around the world during this election year, whether that's the recent elections in South Africa, to India, or just over this past week in Europe, is when people feel that their needs are not being met, when they feel a lack of agency, when they have feelings of powerlessness and despair, this is translated at the ballot box, right? But if we, and look, I think if we fail to deliver meaningful policy change that allows AI to be truly beneficial for society, if we allow the negative, all these issues that the International Monetary Fund are talking about in terms of bad predictions, if we don't get the right policy in place, then, we have the chance that we may actually contribute even more to these feelings of apathy and indifference, but at the same time, I don't believe it has to be this way. I don't believe we are prisoners of fate. I think we are in control of our destiny. And on this, I actually believe artificial intelligence rolled out in an equitable way, you invest in energy poverty, you put the right regulations in place to minimize the harms, and you equip people, particularly policy entrepreneurs, to use AI. AI itself might serve as a tool in the pursuit of policy entrepreneurship. We know that, and it's always been our belief, and certainly my personal belief as a co-founder of Global Citizen, that citizen-led accountability is key to delivery, right? And AI tools could dramatically help us to hold governments accountable for the promises they made with the Sustainable Development Goals, accountable in the sunlight, with the best information, with the best accountability, with the best transparency, if we can get this into the hands of citizen advocates. And if we can do that, then I truly believe we can reshape our politics for good. I want to thank everyone. Some people have asked me before how they can get the book, and I always forget how to say this, but you can get it online. You can get it at the website, and you can also get it on Audible as well. But really, one last message I just want to give a shout out to is we do not know where the final destination might take us, and nor does that matter. What matters is there are actions we can take right now in front of us. There are meaningful actions we can take that can impact the world. Change starts with us. Eleanor Roosevelt, who co-wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, famously said, "The way to begin is to begin." And with that, I think there are numerous actions in front of us, like the young woman I met in Barbados, who are seizing this opportunity and saying, let's go out, let's put this together. There's still at this moment, a lot of things are in flux, and let's shape this, because together, if we can do that, then we can achieve and accelerate progress towards many of the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Márcia, for kind introduction.
Well, thank you, Mick. That was really a critical conversation, because we know that we have to engage policy entrepreneurs. And I wondered, you meet a lot of members of the choir in your work, people who understand the message, what's you're trying to achieve. But what about young people more broadly? What kinds of tools, particularly that AI can provide, so that you can bring more individuals into feeling empowered, that they don't have to feel that they are passive to the forces of change or power that they have no way to influence. So in addition to those that you're talking with, who are the ones that we'll see at the Global Citizen Festival, what about young people more broadly?
Yeah, look, whenever I have people come and meet me and say, what can I do? I always try and shift away from just raising awareness around the problem, right? I say, well, okay, what is the problem you're trying to address? And then what is your goal around it? And really focus with laser tight precision on a goal. And it does not matter. Do not talk yourself out of the fact you don't have access to funding, you don't have access to famous people, you don't have access to capital, right? I think particularly in this day and age, right, when people feel apathetic, at the same time, people are crying out for solutions and they're looking for things to galvanize around. And I still believe, even if it's a naively audacious goal, if you drop that solution in there, right, and give people, almost a way to have visibility in the fog or the mist that's around them, you can attract networks that will overcome implementation experience, that will overcome inaccess to capital, inaccess to funds. And the good news is like, I've been reaching young people and young advocates all around the world, in the global south, in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Barbados. Good ideas can come from anywhere. And actually now we've got the tools to actually connect them with platforms like us to make a difference. And I often, reflect on that. Some of the most meaningful campaigns we've done at Global Citizens weren't those campaigns where we developed the goal. It was when others came to us, in many cases advocates, and pitched us on this and said, you need to take this up and galvanize around it. So I would say that goal, but also no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And so look out and try and, hijack those platforms to amplify and spread your message. Yeah.
Well, probably time for one more question, Mick. You are an incredibly busy person doing lots of things around the world. How are you using AI tools to make you even more impactful as you spread your message about the importance of each one of us taking control and trying to make an individual difference?
So I think in really three ways. There's probably how we make the platform more inclusive and accessible, right? And in that, there's so many ways which AI can do that. It can whether it's translation and global citizen, we try and be everywhere, but, and we should be, that's in our name, but, we can't afford to have translators for every single language, right? And so I think from this point of view, in some ways, it makes our content incredibly more accessible, incredibly more inclusive. I think the second piece is, how can we actually use AI to challenge ourselves to communicate what is very policy heavy ideas often, and mainstream it and put this out in the open. And this is where I think, AI can help us become very concise, very clear, and also think about our audiences in new and different ways, in a way that's going to resonate and attract attention. Because at the end of the day, if you're speaking to the echo chamber, and I see this all the time in the climate world, if you're talking about net zero, 1.5 degrees all over here, and you're not building a constituency of broader support, you're never going to be able to build a base that's going to be able to bring about huge policy change. And then I would say the third one is a piece, and perhaps most important, in the book, I talk about the implementer, right? Change happens when you can land the plane, when the rubber hits the road. And I see Ray in the comments has put a question, how to audit it to make sure that the money is really being utilized without paying money to people in charge. And I think there is a way in which, AI can help us in order to hold governments accountable for their commitments and track the implementation and be transparent a bit about where that is at. And to give you an example, Global Citizen historically, our 33 million plus actions over the last decade, has helped lead to commitments from businesses, from the private sector, from philanthropy, in excess of $60 billion. And traditionally, we have tracked that all manually, right? We have it on Salesforce now, so you can pull up any commitment, but it requires us manually going through, looking at press releases, looking at budgets, right? And sometimes it can take a very long time after the fact, 6 months, 8 months, right? With this, it's actually enhancing our ability in real time to have the right data to be able to track the implementation of these commitments. Put in another way, I know AI is being used to track, for instance, illegal deforestation in the Amazon with those data inputs at an incredible rate, and be able to give us a picture of progress or success. By the way, currently in the last 18 months, it's been a picture of progress. It's legal deforestation in the Amazon is at historic lows, but having access to the data tells us that story and where we can target in a far more focused way.
Well, Mick, you show us what can be done with the power of one person, just beginning, as you indicated in the words of Eleanor Roosevelt. So a great, very positive note for us to end our last formal session. And I will thank you on behalf of all of my colleagues at RELX for your continued partnership with us on Inspiration Day, and long may it continue. And I will cede the virtual floor back to Shivi for final remarks.
Wonderful. Gosh, thank you for that, Mick and Márcia. I could listen to you guys for ages. Mick, it's so clear that from co-producing some of the globe's most impactful social campaigns, concerts, events, that your initiatives have reached millions of people, and you have such long-standing experience in really tapping into different sectors for support, for practical support, to help local and regional organizations that are working to provide access to healthcare, education, climate resilience, a lot of the different factors that tie into the UN's SDG goals. Right. Thank you so much for sharing your insights at RELX's SDG Inspiration Day. A reminder to all that from the beginning of the day, we have had a scribe in attendance, creating a graphic of all the day's themes as they've unfolded. And at this stage, I am dying to see the outcome. And so let's see if we can bring onto screen the wonderful illustrator from Scriberia to show us a graphic and possibly even just explain a little bit. Hi, Jules.
Hello, hi.
Wow, look at
that. I'm an illustrator and I work with Scriberia, which is a company that specializes in live illustration. So I've basically been sitting in since the beginning, listening to the entire event and taking these live illustrated notes throughout. Basically, I've been asked to talk a bit about like what I've chosen to illustrate. Obviously, there was a lot of excitement about practical application and potential, so I did try to make that apparent in the scribe. And a big through line from the day for me was curiosity about ethics and application, which came up in, I think, every single plenary and speech. And that the main takeaway is that it's definitely is extremely useful for grunt work and rifling through tons of info, but there's still a need for like humans to safeguard, especially on biases, etc. I hope that makes sense, and I hope you can see that all in the illustration.
Oh, absolutely. That's really visually and intellectually very impressive and striking. I was sort of making note of a number of those things, and I've taken a screenshot as well. I think it's really fantastic. Thank you so much, Jules, for that.
Thank you.
Right, everyone, as we start to draw to a close, got our final minute or two, I want to say it's been such a pleasure to be your host today for this virtual event. We know that AI offers huge potential opportunities for value creation. And we've also explained, as even Jules reminded us, how mindful we've got to be of mitigating some of the roadblocks there. But I, for one, as an innovation futurist and AI researcher, am so much more hopeful than frightened or concerned about living in an AI age. I believe in augmented intelligence, that we have human skills complemented by AI, not one displacing the other. And I'd rally all of us to consider how we might move into a human-led AI future, and one that's sustainable all around. I want to share our gratitude on behalf of RELX and all the event partners, to the thousands of people that joined us. We had a really, really high number, in the thousands, dip in and out. Some stayed for the whole day, some stayed for the first half or second half, but loads of people were essentially allowed to have access to the diverse voices on here, which is real testament to RELX and its partners. Right. I hope you feel inspired to take action in support of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I know I have. I'm Shivi Jervis, and it's been such an honor to be your moderator for this extremely insightful and memorable day. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching.